certified by the Board of Editors in the Life Sciences, and I strongly recommend anybody who's serious about medical writing consider taking the ELS exam. The material that I'm going to be talking about tonight will help you pass the ELS exam. The ELS exam has a lot of questions that deal with word order and a lot of questions that deal with logic. So if you want to pass the ELS exam, then I strongly recommend that you learn the things that I'm going to be talking about tonight, and also review some basic concepts of logic, basic inductive reasoning, and so forth. There's a lot of the questions on the ELS exam are things like, they'll give you a set of facts, and they say, well, from these facts, what conclusions can you draw? And you either can do that or you can't. But that's a skill that's largely learned. But in order to learn that skill, you must first learn some grammar. Now, this is the draft of the cover of my book, which is going to be out next month. That's a image from a fresco in Pompeii. She's holding the thing that she's holding in her hand is actually wax tablets. So these were probably her household accounts. So she's probably not really a writer. She's probably just a wealthy matron, just keeping track of all the money that they have. Oh, and I talk about the liberal arts, and I'm going to be talking about how grammar is the foundation, is the first step towards studying the liberal arts. So when I say that how the traditional liberal arts can set you free, I mean it's a liberating discipline, and that's as Marge said, these disciplines, or this discipline of grammar can help you become a better writer, but it also is empowering and liberating in many other ways. Okay, now I know some of you are probably tired and you may have other things to do, so if you want to bolt early, this is going to be my take-home message for you all. Number one, get the AMWA grammar course. The AMWA has some lovely grammar instructional materials, or at least some other grammar course with solved problems, because it's not just enough to read about these principles. You must test your knowledge to see if you understand them, because people do not have a reliable sense of whether they're good at grammar. People who are bad at grammar think they're good at it. This is a principle that's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and I go into it in not trivial. This particular website is the one that I've used for many years to train new proofreaders and new copy editors. It explains all the things you need to know about how the different parts of speech work, what the different elements of the sentence are, how they work together. It also has an excellent introduction to how to diagram sentences, and I strongly recommend that people learn to diagram sentences. That's point number 3, point number 2, learn how to diagram a sentence. And as I go on in the presentation this evening, I'll give you some sentence diagrams, and you'll see why it's important. Also, I write articles for the American Medical Writers Association Journal on some grammatical issues. So I've written several. There's some have already been published, and some are still in the pipeline. I go into a lot of detail on certain things like what is the passive voice, what is the sentence adverb. A lot of those things I cover in detail in those articles. So if you're already an AMWA member, make sure that you read those articles, because you've already paid for access to them through your AMWA membership. And after you have a very good grounding in grammar, I strongly recommend that people get an introductory textbook on logic and start studying the basics of logic. Now, why is grammar important? Grammar is the thin dividing line, the thin, sharp dividing line that divides us from all other species. Human beings can use grammar. No other animal has been able to. That's why other animals can't talk. I mean, it sounds like a simple thing, but why is it? I mean, parrots can make sounds that sound like English words, but you can never have a real conversation with a parrot. You can train a parrot to give you certain kinds of responses in response to certain kind of cues. And you can get, a smart parrot like an African gray can get very good at that. So you can there was one that, Alex, they taught him, if they handed him a key, and they would say, what metal this? Or, what matter this? And he would say metal. So he could give you answers in response to certain kinds of prompts. But, and chimpanzees that they tried, and gorillas and so forth that they've tried in language experiments, they've tried to teach them American Sign Language, and they can't do something that child will be able to do very shortly. And that is tell you what happened, who did what to whom. This concept of a subject-verb-object relationship, the chimpanzees can't do it. And no matter how hard they've tried to teach them to do it, chimps don't get it. And that's why they don't talk. So humans, it's a practically universal thing among human beings. Unless somebody has a really serious neurologic problem, they automatically learn the basics of these rules of grammar in early childhood. I mean, and a little child this tall can tell you what happened that afternoon. A chimpanzee will never be able to do that. And that's just the difference between human beings and chimpanzees. I mean, and there's no other animal that can use grammar. And what it comes down to is grammar. That's subject, verb, object relationship, modification, aspect and tense of verbs, mood of verbs. I mean, if you teach the chimpanzee signs for Laurie, banana, and give, the chimp will probably start saying banana, banana, Laurie, give, banana, and then if you give him a banana, he'll be happy about it. But that chimpanzee will never be able to figure out how to say, Laurie gave me 2 bananas yesterday. Any child can do that. No chimpanzee can ever do that. So this difference between human beings and chimpanzees in our ability to use symbolic expressions boils down to grammar. We can do it and they can't. So grammar is not just a set of picky, meaningless rules, such as saying he doesn't instead of he don't. It's not just about saying I can't get no satisfaction is not standard English. I mean, that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is grammar is the study of how words are altered and combined to form meaningful sentences. Now the rules such as whether or not you should use a double negative, that's window dressing. The things I want to talk about are really the structural elements of language, the things that actually convey meaning in such a way that people can communicate with each other. Each language has its own rules of grammar. Sign languages for the deaf are proper languages because they have a grammar. And that's why chimpanzees could never really properly learn American Sign Language, because they can't do the grammar. They can mimic signs, but they don't get the grammar. They can't do it. So, okay, I've already explained that part. All human societies use language, and practically all human beings learn to use language naturally. That's because we've got this language acquisition device built into our brains. No other animal has it, and we have it. All human languages have certain characteristics in common. There's this subject-verb-object relations. That's built into all natural human languages. Now, they may put the things in different order, such as, what's the little guy from Star Wars?
R2-D2?
No, the
Yoda.
Yoda. Yeah. Notice he's got some word order issues. He'll say something he is, and they'll put the complement, the predicate complement at the beginning of the sentence, and then the subject, and then the verb. So it's like an object, subject, verb word order, which is different. I mean, we can still understand what he means, but he still can do that. It's just he puts the words in kind of in his own. He has his own little rules, which differ from standard English. Okay, if grammar is innate and universal, why study it? If any toddler can understand the basic principles of grammar, why do we bother to study and teach grammar? And believe it or not, this has been a serious question within educational circles. A lot of people in the teaching profession say that we shouldn't teach grammar. Children can already run and jump. They can do that thing. All children learn, who unless they've got a physical disability, they all learn to run and jump and throw things. So why should we bother with athletic coaching? Anyone can dance. All right, some of us can't dance well, but So why bother with dance class? I mean, isn't that a waste of time? Isn't that boring and harmful? I mean, is it, why should we teach somebody to dance? They can dance already.
They can do it better.
Exactly. Children naturally hit people. So why should we bother with martial arts training? And all these things together, these are things that are skills that they're sort of like a technology. These are things that we have developed skills to a higher level that they're natural abilities that are trained, and through this training you develop abilities that you otherwise wouldn't have. Okay, now grammar was the first step in developing the verbal arts. For thousands of years, at least 2,400 years, the ancient Greeks understood that grammar was the first step towards studying philosophy. And from what I understand, the philosophers of ancient India understood the same concept. I mean, it's whenever they started writing literature and writing philosophy, people started saying, well, gee, grammar is important. And especially once they had to communicate with people from a different language, and they noticed that the rules are different between this language and that language. So then they started analyzing that, and they said, well, gee, how do we translate this holy book into that language? That really said, okay, we've got to study grammar if we're going to have philosophy.
Grammar school.
Yeah, exactly, grammar school. Now, the classical liberal arts are a set of 7 subjects. They were developed largely in ancient Athens, and they served the purpose of promoting democracy, because Athens they coined the word democracy. There were 3 verbal arts: grammar, which is the study of the structure of sentences, and it's a study of how words are altered and combined to form meaningful sentences. Logic is the study of arguments, and it deals with whether an argument is valid or invalid, strong or weak. Can you trust the conclusion of an argument? What kind of conclusions can you draw from the kind of evidence that you have? So the study of logic enables you to find truth, or at least to avoid being misled in predictable ways. Rhetoric is the art of persuasive speech. Now, one hopes that people study some logic before they study rhetoric. Because there are 3 means of persuasion, according to Aristotle, who wrote the book on everything that's been written about rhetoric since Aristotle's day has been commentary on Aristotle. So he said there were 3 ways to persuade people. You could either use logos, which meant logic and reason, logic, evidence, and so forth, or you could use an appeal to character. In other words, you say, well, so-and-so says this, so therefore it must be true. Well, if that person has a track record of being honest, maybe that's reasonable. And the other means of persuasion is just an appeal to emotion. So if you can't use logic to make your points, then all you have left are name-calling and hair-pulling and fear-mongering. So when the fact that we don't teach grammar and then thus cannot teach logic goes far toward explaining the ugliness and pointlessness of so much of our current political debates. So that's how important grammar is. You remove grammar from grammar school, you pull the rug out from under your culture. The 4 arts of number were the quadrivium. This was the trivium. The 4 arts of number are the quadrivium. Mathematics was the study of number. Geometry is the study of number and space. Music is the study of number and time. And astronomy is the study of number, space, and time. And now these 7 basic disciplines are essential for the development of higher order thinking skills. So when I read a lot about in educational circles how they're saying, well, we want to help children develop higher order thinking skills. And I say, well, then why don't you stop teaching grammar? Because how to develop higher order thinking skills is something they worked out 2,300 years ago in ancient Greece. So, and again, most of Western philosophy, they say, is really just footnotes to Plato and footnotes to Aristotle. So, again, that's how important grammar is. It's the beginning of this whole structure. Now, I mentioned something before called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Dunning and Kruger are psychologists, And they did this, they published this very controversial article. They studied self-assessments. In other words, they got a bunch of undergraduates at Cornell University. The standard lab rat of psychology studies is the university undergraduate. So they got a bunch of university undergraduates, and they tested their abilities in various domains. They tested their ability to use grammar. They tested their ability to think logically. They tested various intellectual and social domains. And then they asked these people, how good are you at grammar? How good are you at logical thinking? How good is your sense of humor? And they asked these people to assess their own abilities. And what they found was the people who had very poor skills thought their skills were above average. And the people who had really good skills didn't realize how good their skills were. Now the problem is that the people who have poor skills don't notice their mistakes. Other people do, but they don't. So they think, well, gee, I don't make mistakes, I must be good at this. And so because they didn't lack they lacked the skill to figure out whether they were good at something, because the fact that they didn't know how to do something meant that they didn't know how to tell whether they were doing it well. So the solution was to teach them how to do it. So once their skills improved, then their confidence plummeted, but they were actually more skilled than they were. So part of what we see today as narcissism, people who think they're really good at something, they think they're just the bomb at things, but they're really not, is because of this Dunning-Kruger effect. It's miseducation and undereducation. They've been deprived of the kind of instruction, they've been deprived of grammar instruction, they've been deprived of instruction in logic and so forth. So they don't realize how handicapped they are mentally by this lack of education. And again, the first step is grammar. Now this is what happened. These are the scores in the verbal SAT. Now, at this period here was the time when the number of test takers, the pool of test takers increased dramatically. So during this time, a lot of people who had not previously been considered college material started taking the SAT. And notice how stable the test scores were. Then what happened here? Now there are a couple things happened that combined to create this effect. One was in the years before this decline started, the textbook publishing companies started dumbing down the textbooks. So children were reading a lot fewer, they were getting a lot fewer new vocabulary words in their school books. So when they encountered words on the SAT that they didn't know, they couldn't answer the questions. So that was one part. But also, if you look at 1963 was the year in which an important paper was published by the National Council of Teachers of English. They claimed, falsely in my opinion, claimed that grammar lessons do not help children learn to write better, and that they are probably even harmful. So that kind of thinking, and when I've talked to various people in educational circles in the course of telling them about my book and so forth, and they say, oh, grammar doesn't help. It's actually harmful. I mean, I've so many people who are considered experts in education have told me this, and I'm just distressed. So anyway, it took this plunge. And, you know, again, you can blame the internet, you can blame texting and all that, but it's, you know, these are things that happen really.
Long before
Exactly, exactly. And people either say, oh, well, it's because of television. Okay, well, yeah, but they also have televisions in other countries. Did they see the same decline in verbal skills? I don't think so. So I think this sharp decline was a direct result of educational policy in the United States. And I think that some people have a lot of explaining to do. I mean, why did you keep on with those policies even after you saw that they were harmful? Okay, so right over that. Okay, now here's what, you know, here's the meat of why you're here, you know, what we're going to talk about tonight. why bad writers write badly. I've been an editor for a long time, and during that time I've seen a lot of really bad writing. I've seen a lot of really bad writing coming from some of the
What?
people with the most expensive educations in the country. And when I said, well, gee, these people are not stupid people, I wouldn't hesitate to let this person perform surgery on me. But my goodness, he's a bad writer. You know, what's going on? It's not stupidity. It's not lack of education. Why does this person not know how to write? And what I found was, when I analyzed what's wrong with their writing, it comes down to these basic problems. And these are all things that they should have learned in 7th grade. They don't make proper use of a dictionary. They don't really think about, they don't look words up, they don't think about what the words mean, and they don't necessarily even know what part of speech they are. Their subject-verb objects and its actions often make no sense. Their nouns are not doing their verbs. They give a direct object to an intransitive verb. And this subject-verb-object relationship makes no sense. I mean, they're not really thinking, does their sentence literally say, does it say what they really mean? Oftentimes it doesn't, and it's partly carelessness, but partly lack of awareness that it matters. They often put their modifiers in the wrong places. This drives me bananas. They just put their words in the wrong order. They've got the right words, but they don't understand that if you have, for example, a prepositional phrase that could be either adjectival or adverbial, if you put it in the wrong position in the sentence, it will change from being adverbial to adjectival or the other way. So the entire meaning of that prepositional phrase will change. So you really have to put your modifier in the right place if you want it to modify the right thing. They make annoying errors in parallel structure. Now that doesn't necessarily affect meaning so much, but it's annoying. And it stops people to say, well, wait a minute, why is this sentence structured this way? I mean, it's like, is there some sort of meaning I'm missing? Their pronouns lack clear reference, and they don't make proper use of conjunctive adverbs. As a result, their writing is incoherent. Now these are all things that you can easily explain if you understand grammar terminology. These are things that, to tell somebody what's wrong, yeah.
I just have a question. I was one of these ADD kids who refused to learn grammar in 8th grade. And, I sort of learned it myself, but I don't understand, like, the terms modifier.
I'll get to that.
And things. I have to take a step back before
I'll get to those.
Okay.
Yeah, we're getting to that. Okay, bad writing is unclear. Now, when we're talking about medical writing and talking about technical writing in general, the purpose of the kind of writing that we do as medical communicators is to communicate about medicine. We want to communicate ideas about the single most important subject, which is life and death, and health and suffering. And if we can't communicate effectively about that sort of thing, then we've got a real problem. So bad writing is unclear, and bad medical writing can be deadly. Now, if you write badly about a commonplace subject, if you're writing about celebrity gossip, or if you're a sports writer or something where everybody knows the rules of the game and so forth, and you're a bad writer, people can use their existing knowledge about the subject you're writing about to figure out what on earth you meant. But if you are writing about something that they don't already know really well, they're not going to be able to learn from your writing. So you will have failed. You will have failed in your mission to communicate if your writing is unclear. Okay, now how I teach writing. I review the 8 parts of speech. I teach people how to get the full use out of their dictionary and thesaurus. I teach people how to diagram sentences. And I teach people how to apply grammatical concepts to improve the clarity of their sentences and the coherence of their paragraphs. So once you understand these grammatical concepts, it becomes really easy to figure out what's wrong with a bad sentence and how to fix it. And if you're an editor it's extremely important to know these grammatical terms, because sooner or later, you're going to have to edit something that was written by a very bad writer. And you will have to make a lot of editorial corrections to this very bad writing. And the person may have a royal hissy fit. So what you do in that kind of situation, number one, don't make any changes unless they're absolutely necessary. Number two, when the person, has the hissy fit, you say, well, let's just go through the manuscript line by line and we'll correct anything that bothers you. So then you start going through the manuscript line by line. And they say, well, why did you change that? And you say, well, that verb's intransitive. And they say, oh. And they say, well, why did you change that? And you say, well, that's an absolute phrase. You can't use, or that's a participial phrase. You can't use it as an absolute phrase. And they say, and they'll say, oh. And they will stop arguing with you because they don't want to admit that they have no idea what you're talking about. So what you can do is use, it's like jujitsu, you use the narcissism against them so that they will stop arguing with you because they do not want to reveal that they're not well informed. Okay, so, I should have let you see that. So what are the 8 parts of speech? Nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, conjunctions, pronouns, prepositions, and one more. Interjections. Okay, that's it. So there they are. Now there might be more than that in some of the language, but I don't know. Now, what I recommend is use an electronic dictionary and use it heavily. I have used electronic dictionaries on my computer, but since I upgraded, my old computer program doesn't work on the new computer. I just use the one that's online. So I subscribe to one of the medical dictionaries, and I use the Merriam-Webster website a lot. Use the entire dictionary entry. It's there to help you. So pay attention to what part of speech something is, because something could be a preposition or a conjunction, and that will affect how, if you have a problem with a sentence with that word in it, sometimes if you just look that word up in the dictionary and you see, oh, it's a conjunction, well that makes sense, and then it'll solve your problem. Read the definitions. Sometimes the definitions will differ from the way what you thought that word meant, and this will save you a lot of embarrassment from using a word in a way that's not really what the word's supposed to mean. The usage notes. If you have questions about words such as lie and lay, or if you want to know whether you can use the word they when you don't know how many persons you're talking about. It could be one, it could be two. Is it okay to use they as a pronoun of indefinite number? The usage notes cover that kind of thing. So read the usage notes. They're in there to help you. Spelling and hyphenation breaks. If you're proofreading and you see where the hyphens go at the end of the lines, that's in the dictionary. So again, it's all that stuff's in there to help you make use of it. You can use a thesaurus to make sure that you're using the best word, and you want to make sure that the word actually means what it says. That the definition is what you want, but also that the general feeling tone that the word conveys is also what you want to express. So by denotation, I mean the dictionary definition of what the word means. Connotation means other kinds of emotional baggage that word has with it. For example, the word cubicle. Marge and I worked for a company where our fearless leader told us that he did not want us to refer to our workstations as cubicles, because he didn't want us to think that our working life was like Dilbert's. But it was.
Dilbert.
Look at
Okay. Now here's we're getting into a little bit of the meat of the grammar thing here. Now, the heart of a sentence is this subject, verb, object transactions. And these, like here you've got a subject and an intransitive verb. An intransitive verb is a verb that can't take a direct object, or doesn't. So if I say I eat can be intransitive. Now if I say I eat pie, eat can also be transitive. So what transitivity means is there a direct object or not? So if it's intransitive, no direct object. If it's transitive, in other words, it's transferring something to this direct object. So in other words, I eat pie. You know, the pie is the direct object. Now an indirect object is, for example, if I say, I gave $20 to George. George would be the indirect object. So now that this is some of the basic stuff that you're going to do with sentence diagramming, and I think it's best to remember this through interpretive dance. So take your left hand, and I'll face the front so you don't get confused with left hand and right hand. Okay, take your left hand. Okay, subject, verb, direct object. Subject, verb, direct object. Got that? Okay, now use your right hand to put the indirect object in. Okay, ready? Subject, verb, or transitive verb, direct object, indirect object. Okay, everybody got that?
Yep.
Now, this is where it gets a little confusing here. A linking verb is a verb such as is, to be, which is, are, was, were, or a verb like to become. So these are words that link the subject to some complement, which could be a noun or an adjective, or a pronoun. So if you say, I am tired. Tired is an adjective. So you're linking that adjective to the subject. You can also have it as a noun. I am a human being. And you can also, now this is where people get confused. You can also link this to a pronoun. Now the pronoun, because it's linking to the subject, is going to be in the nominative case. That's why Don Quixote and the Man of La Mancha sang, I am I, Don Quixote. I am I. So when you pick up the telephone and say, is Laurie there? And I say, this is she. I don't say, this is her. This is she. Or if you're a man, you say, this is he. So it's, I, he, she, it, who, whatever, is in the nominative case when there's a linking verb. Now a linking verb can also be something like feel, like I feel sick, because that's linking sick to this subject. Now where it gets confusing is when people say I feel bad. Now a lot of people want to hypercorrect that, and they think, well, it should be badly because it's modifying feel, but it's not. It's linking I feel bad. It's not I feel badly, because it's not describing how you are doing the act of feeling. That bad is linking to you. Now the way to remember this is the other name for a linking verb is a copulative verb. Now my late father-in-law was an English professor, and we were at a party one time, and somebody came up to him and said, well, should it be I feel bad or I feel badly? And he said, Laurie, you answer this one, you're an editor. And I said, it should be I feel bad. And the person said, why? And I said, well, because to feel is a copulative verb. So I think, yeah.
Well, with those copulative verbs, like, it looks good, it smells this way, I kind of think that the copulative sort of comes down to kind of an equal sign.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. That's a good way to remember it. Because the is an equal sign, basically. And a lot of these others are. Yes?
Could you explain the indirect object a little bit to me? I understand I eat pie, but why is I gave $20 to George indirect object?
Because I'm not giving George. I'm giving something to George.
Okay.
Now this can get a little bit confusing because, well, see, in German and in Old English, that indirect object was in a different case That you alter the word endings and so forth, you alter the pronoun, so you can figure out whether it's a direct or indirect object. Now, in German, they still do this. So when native German speakers speak English, they say things like, throw me down the stairs, my hat. Now, in German, you would use mir for to me, throw to me down the, be obvious by which form of the pronoun me that you're using, that it's dative. And likewise, when you say, oh, woe is me. There was a famous grammar book that was saying, woe, woe is I, or whatever. They were saying, well, this is hypercorrect. No, the woe is unto me. It was a dative construction. The Bible is full of it. Because it was a remnant of Old English. Woe is me, meaning unto me. So you can say unto me if that is me dative construction doesn't sit right with you, but woe is unto me. So that it's but the indirect object is if there's a to or for or something like that, a preposition can be used. We often use prepositions to indicate that something's an indirect object. Does that help?
I think, excuse me.
Yeah.
I think actually studying foreign languages can help English speakers
Oh, absolutely.
understand their own language.
Absolutely. Because especially one that's highly inflected, like German or Latin, or because in Latin you have the ablative case for the indirect objects. Or I'm sorry, you have the dative case for the indirect objects, and you have the ablative case for things like if something's part of an adverbial phrase. So you have two different cases for that, two different kinds of usage. Which is why it's hard for people who haven't learned Latin early enough to learn Latin. Because the ability to learn grammatical concepts erodes as we mature. Now here's one of the things that AMA goes into specifically is the question of active or passive voice. Now, a lot of people who have never really learned much about grammar know that it's bad to use the passive voice. And that's one of the few rules that people actually learn in school today, is that it's bad to use the passive voice. And I think they got this from George Orwell's essay, Politics and the English Language, in which he said avoid using the passive voice. But if you read that essay all the way through, you will see some of the most powerful use of the passive voice in all of English letters. So, let me first explain what the passive voice is and tell you when it's right to use it and when it's maybe not so right to use it. When you have this subject, again, we've got our dance thing here. Subject, verb, direct object, indirect object, okay? Now when you have the subject in this sentence, when you've got the active voice, the agent is doing the verb to the direct object. So I eat pie. Or I gave $20 to George. Okay? Now here, if I want to take this, what was originally the direct object, and I want to make it the subject of the sentence, my original direct object is $20 was given to George by me. So when you again, in Latin, this would probably be the ablative case, and this would be the dative case, so you could tell by the word endings. So here you've got the original direct object and the passive voice. Now the passive voice in English is constructed in a different way than it's constructed in some other languages. We use the past participle and a verb of being. So if I say, was given. So was is the auxiliary verb, and the past participle is given. So $20 was given, as opposed to I gave $20 to George, $20 was given to George by me. So the thing is, to make the passive voice, you have to start off with a transitive verb. You have to start off, the original sentence has to have been something where there was an agent, a transitive verb, and a direct object. If it's an intransitive verb, if there's no direct object to begin with, you can't do this.
you give another example of the indirect, of the transitive verb and agent?
Okay, I sing is intransitive. I sing the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy is transitive. So in other words, I sing is just, I'm not saying what the direct object was. But if I sang something, then that singing something is a transitive sense. So I'm transferring the action from the subject to an object. So that's what transitive implies. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay, so if I say, you know, the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy of Company B was sung,
Could you say I sing loud?
I'm sorry?
Could you say I sing loud?
No, because loud would be an adverb,
Oh, I see.
because that's modifying how you sing. And I'll get into modification next. So when you have the situation where you've got this direct object, you've got an object that's being turned into the subject of a sentence, then you must use the passive voice. And then, now where the passive voice is useful is when the agent is unknown or unimportant. And we see, and AMA gives a specific example of a person who was brought into the emergency room. He has been shot. By whom? Who cares? The problem is he's been shot and they're dealing with it, and they don't really know or care who shot the person who's in their emergency room. What they're dealing with is the fact that he has been shot. So that's passive voice, has been shot. Yeah.
For some people, because other people don't agree, when you're writing about a clinical study, and you want to emphasize the objective nature of the study, the medicine was given to 45 patients. It makes it more impersonal than for the authors to say, we gave the subjects.
If the agent is unknown or unimportant, then it's perfectly acceptable to use the passive voice. Yes?
On the other hand, you could say 45 patients received the medicine.
Exactly, because the patient's received, because receive is an active voice
I
verb.
mean, it depends what's important, whether it's the medicine or whether it's the fact that 45 patients received it.
Yeah. So does this make sense to people? This thing with the transitive or passive voice? Okay. And again, if you don't know or don't care who did the verb, then it's okay to use, then it makes sense to use the passive voice. If you have that by something, if you have that by agent thing in your sentence, then it's probably best to put it into the active voice. It depends, but I mean that's,
These are scattered.
okay. So in general, use the active voice if the agent is mentioned, if the agent is mentioned in the sentence, and use the passive voice if the agent is unknown.
It's, after 8:15, so.
Okay, I'll wrap this up pretty soon. Okay. I give you the other part of the sentence diagramming dance, modification. Now, we've done this, subject, verb, object, indirect object, okay? Modification goes like this, okay?
Could you do that again?
Okay, subject, verb, object, indirect object, okay? Modification.
Thank you.
Then you wondered why I wore flat shoes.
Yes.
Okay, so notice we've got these are adjectives because they're modifying the noun. Articles are adjectives. We have a, this is a noun, see the noun, it's this indirect object is on the level, so it's either a noun or a verb or a pronoun. Now this word that's connecting it here, that's another part of the word is sentence diagramming dance, prepositions. Prepositions are a function word that turn a noun phrase into a modifier. So you remember a regular modification dance is like this. Okay, now the preposition dance is like this. The preposition and the object of the preposition. Okay? So you have the man gave $20. You see how they've got this, like, this is how you do for a direct object, and it's a slanty thing for a predicate complement, actually, if you can see that in your handouts. But see, here's this to charity, the worthy charity. So the man gave $20 to the worthy charity. So when, and you can figure out generally through word order, which is modifying what. Now, where it gets confusing is when we have phrases standing in for adjectives and adverbs. Well, prepositional phrase can, in the previous example here, you see, to the worthy charity is an adverbial phrase because it's modifying the verb. Some adverbial or some prepositional phrases can be adverbial, in which they act as if they were adverbs, and some of them can be adjectival, which means they act as if they're adjectives. And if you put them in the wrong place in the sentence, you can end up having it modify the wrong thing, or even change from being adverbial to adjectival, in which case your sentence will make no sense. Okay, so how much more time do I have?
It's 20 after 8.
Okay, well, anyway, this, let me see, how much more do I have here? Now, the other thing I want to talk about is the difference between a phrase and a clause. Remember that thing I told you about the noun, subject, verb, subject, predicate, subject, verb, object, subject, verb? If you have that transaction, you have a clause. If this, or a sentence. If you don't have that subject-verb transaction, it's just a phrase. So if you have a string of words that acts as if it were a single part of speech, it's a phrase. If it contains a noun-verb transaction, it's a clause. No noun-verb transaction, then it's a phrase. Noun-verb transaction, it's a clause. Now this is important because the rules on how to punctuate depend on this.
Can you give an example?
Example, let's see. Here we go. He cooked and I did the dishes. Okay? Noun-verb transaction is an independent clause. Here's a coordinating conjunction, and here's another clause. Here we have, now, but if you just said, he cooked and did the dishes, there would be no comma, because there'd be a compound predicate.
Because you have only one subject.
Yes. So, well, let me just give you a little thing here about the coordinating conjunctions and parallel structure. Now remember, okay, we've got this other element to the dance. We've got noun, verb, direct object, indirect object, modifiers, prepositions, okay, conjunctions. Okay, see, these are conjunctions. It's joining elements. Now where this gets important is what they call parallel structure. Now notice that these two elements are parallel in the diagram. Jack and Jill, okay? And played tennis and ate lunch. So, now here's where bad parallel structure gets annoying. He likes bicycling, canoeing, and to go on hikes. Isn't that better? And here's another example of parallel structure. Lead types slowly but carefully. Now, it's called parallel structure because these elements are on parallel lines in the diagram. So whenever you see these coordinating conjunctions, look for parallel structure problems. Well, I've got a bunch of other stuff on how to punctuate according to the independent clauses and all that kind of stuff. But it is covered in AMA. And you will also get that kind of background in the website and so forth that I recommended, and I've got the website in your handout. But my overall message is do study grammar to help improve your writing and your thinking skills, and get training from somebody who can correct your mistakes. Because as I explained before, people who have poor skill in grammar don't know they have poor skill in grammar because they can't see their own mistakes. Yes?
We might also mention an advanced AMWA course recommended what's a wonderful book that's been through many editions called Rhetorical Grammar The author is, the last name of the author is Cohn, K-O-L-N. I think it's Martha Cohn.
What is it,
And
K-O-L-N?
Rhetorical grammar, it's excellent.
Yeah, I haven't read that particular book, so I'll take your word for it.
K-R-O-N?
I think it's Kooln, maybe with an L. Yeah.
K-O-L-N.
And what's
K-O-L-N.
Martha Cohn. I
Martha?
think,
Martha?
yeah, I think so. I'm not, but
Yeah.
rhetorical grammar.
You've got a lot of good slides here. Can you continue, or is there another time when you give this lecture?
Yeah.
Completely?
Well, I have cards.
Do we have the room, Marge, do we have the room till 9?
Yeah, how long do we have the room? Because I've got more slides.
Laurie, how long, Anthony, how long were you?
No, I'm asking you.
I don't know, Barbara's not
I'm
here.
pretty sure.
I think it's till 9 o'clock, but
Okay,
I
okay,
just
well,
wanna
think
make sure Laurie got to the end, and then you can come back and
Well,
and pick
okay.
up some stuff.
Well, I've got some.
Because some people may have some transit
So,
problems.
I've got okay, coordinating conjunctions. If things are coordinate, that means that they're at an equal level. So, so if things that are coordinated are equal. To remember the coordinating conjunctions in English, think fanboys. That's for and not, or for and nor, but, or whatever. So, fanboys. For and not, but, or yet so. So the elements that are joined by a coordinating conjunction should be in the same grammatical form. That's what I mean by parallel structure. So he likes bicycling and something and you know, have them all ing words, because those are in identical, you know, so
What do you mean by fanboys? I understand.
it's just the acronym for, whoops, where to go?
For and nor, but, okay.
It's a mnemonic device.
Yeah. Oh, okay, modifier placement. This is important rules. A modifier that's been put in the wrong place can seem to be modifying the wrong thing. In other words, the meaning of your sentence will change. Now, maybe your reader is alert enough to notice that you're just a bad writer and can fix this in their head as they're going along, or maybe they can't. So, AMA manual urges people to pay careful attention to modifier placement, to make sure that each modifier modifies what you want it to modify. And it's common sense. I mean, there's no reason not to do that. And if you put your modifiers in the wrong place, you will drive people crazy, or you will mislead them.
Can you give an example where it changes the meaning?
Okay. She decided to stop having sex after going to church. Now, does that mean that she decided to take a vow of chastity, or just one of those never on Sunday things? You know, because Sunday is her day of rest. So, you know, if you put the problem with that sentence, she decided to stop having sex. Okay, there's three verbal elements. There's, you know, she decided, which is a finite noun, and then to stop is an infinitive, is a non-finite noun, and then having
Verb.
is also a non-finite noun. So it's a participle.
Verb.
Or I'm sorry, non-finite verb. I'm sorry, finite verb. There's no such thing as finite noun. There's finite verbs. A finite verb is one that is this part of this whole noun-verb thing that can be part of a sentence. I mean, that can be part of an independent clause. It could stand on its own as a sentence. So if I say walking to school today, it's not a complete sentence. So walking is a non-finite verb because it's not, you know, or to dream the impossible dream. There's no subject. So it's not being used it's not finite. It's not part of a subject verb object. It's not part of this. So it's but anyway, she decided to stop having sex. There's three verbal elements in there, and that after going to church could modify, you know, more than, you know, it's hard to tell. When you have an adverbial element in a sentence that has more than one verb or more than one verbal type element in it, you be very careful about where you put that adverbial phrase because you could end up saying something other than what you want to say. Now the way I would solve that problem is either put the adverbial phrase directly after, if you meant that she decided after going to church to stop having sex, then put that after going to church right after decided. Or you can put it at the beginning of the sentence. After going to church, she decided to stop having sex. So, now here, modifier placement. Never put a potentially adjectival prepositional phrase after a noun unless you wanted to modify that noun. Because it will, if you wanted to modify the noun, put it right after the noun, that's a good place for it. But if you wanted it to modify the verb, don't put it after a noun, or it will sound like it's modifying the noun.
You define an adjectival.
Okay, an adjectival prepositional phrase is a prepositional phrase that is acting like an adjective. So if the classic example was, this product is available from Tech America distributors in 10 milliliter bottles. Now, how did you get the distributors into those tiny little bottles? So the product is available in 10 milliliter bottles from Tech America distributors. So if you put that in 10 milliliter bottles, which could modify the product or could modify available, if you put that in the wrong part of the sentence, the meaning changes. So it makes it like, well, was the product or the distributor of the bottles? So I mean, obviously you've got the background knowledge to know that it's the product that's in the bottles, but if you let that kind of sloppiness go in just regular writing, is when you get into some really technical stuff, you're just going to confuse your audience. Never put an adjectival phrase at the beginning of the sentence unless you wanted to modify the subject. So, based on my experience, proofreaders or English majors make good copy editors. That was the example from AMA. Based on my experience, English majors make good copy editors. Well, English major is not based on my experience. I mean, that based on my experience is an adjectival phrase. So, so you wouldn't put that at the beginning of the sentence. Unless you want, if you put something that acts as an adjectival phrase at the beginning of the sentence, it will try to modify the subject whether you want it to or not. I'm seeing confusion. Let me find it.
Yeah, because based on my experience, it doesn't seem to me to be an adjectival phrase. It seems to me to be a phrase that modifies the entire sentence, the entire.
Because it's
concept.
participial. It's based on past part. It's a participial phrase. It is, and
Yeah, well,
okay.
that's true. Okay, so you're saying it's because it's a participle's modified, yes.
And that participial phrase, if you use that participial phrase, now if you wanted to build an absolute phrase, you would have to have the subject. For example, his face white with rage, or his face being white with rage, or his muscles quivering. The sprinter stood on the starting blocks, okay? So muscles quivering is, it's a non-finite verb, but you've got a subject and a participle as part of that phrase. So you can use that as an absolute phrase. I'm getting way too technical.
It's good. It's
But,
good.
but there's a lot of there. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to know about grammar. And a lot of it you can learn from that the Capital Community College website that I cited.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
So does the website give you like tests?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
that's good.
Yes. And a lot of the AML materials do as well. So I strongly urge people to get the AML materials as well.
I have the first grammar book from New York Medical Writers. If I don't understand what the meaning of like dangling modifiers are, could you suggest a reference for that? Or
That website,
which is
the one that's at the beginning of the,
page one.
Yeah, it's on slide 2, under my advice.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you very
because I mean, this kind of presentation that I'm giving, where I really want to just give you the flavor of what's important, and this idea that sentence diagramming is really helps you see the structure of a sentence in ways that are very helpful. So I can't really give you an entire semester's worth of technical detail on grammar. I mean, I'd love to, but I can't. But I could teach you the dance. I mean, you know the dance. All right, what do you do for modifiers? What's the modifier dance? You got it. Okay, what's conjunctions? That's right. All right, preposition. Prepositional phrase, that's right, that's right. You got it, you got it. By George, I think they've got it.
So some of the slides that you're showing are not in our handout.
Some of this, cause I wanted to, I didn't wanna overload you with too much. Now, somebody asked about, dangling modifiers. The participial phrase is dangling if it is modifying something that has been left out of the sentence, or that's not in the sentence. So working quickly, the study was completed early. Well, who was working? I mean, the subject of that non-finite verb is not in a sentence.
The investigators
Right,
should be somewhere.
yeah, because you're not saying who's working. You know, working quickly, the investigators completed the study early would be one way to solve that problem. And here are the based on our experience educational interventions. Well, educational interventions are not based on our experience.
So you put it after educational intervention?
We better.
I would say we believe that, or we have found that educational interventions are needed.
Both of those examples are passive voice. Is that?
No, they're not passive voice.
The top one is
First
Oh,
one?
the first was completed early.
Right.
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with the problem.
Okay, that's what I was
Well,
gonna
it
ask.
does,
Is
because it doesn't have a subject. I mean, it doesn't have.
Oh, you're right, no, you're right,
Yes, and
you're
that's
right,
my
you're
question.
right.
Is it- is
You're right,
it
that's
work-
why, that's why it's dangling,
Like
because
early,
that,
it would make sense.
yeah, so because it's in the passive voice, that's why it's dangling, because if the subject of this verb were the subject of that, then the problem would be solved. You're right, it's because it's a passive voice.
Right, so my question is this one reason why you wouldn't wanna use passive voice as much? Because you're more likely to run into, problems of that nature.
That's a good question. I mean, a dangling modifier can be a problem, and it could stem from the dangling modifier could stem from the use of the passive voice. So I guess it's just like a red flag, just watch for it. I mean, you can fix the sentence various ways, but you're right, if you watch out for dangling modifiers if you got the passive voice.
What are some of the ways you fix it?
Based on our experience, educational intervention without the S is needed to foster high-quality end-of-life care.
I would say that,
We found.
I would say that we believe that, we have found that, evidence suggests that. I mean, there's different ways. Or you could just take this off and just like give it as this sentence is your opinion. And another way to get around this is to replace this with a sentence adverb. A sentence adverb is an adverb that does not modify anything within the sentence. It expresses your opinion about the content of the sentence.
But why do you have an S on the end of interventions if there's only one?
I don't know.
Maybe there are more than one.
There could be more than one intervention, I suppose. I didn't write the sentence.
Yeah.
It's not my sentence. I just picked it out of an old AMA. Okay, so supply the subject to the participle to fix the dangling part.
You know, one of the problems in medical writing, at least because I do, regulatory writing, is very often you have to specify so many things. And you've got so many prepositional phrases piling up one after another, that after a while it's hard to know how to rearrange a sentence so that the adjectival phrases go with the noun that they modify.
Yes, that is a problem. And another problem, if you have a study that has more than one intervention group, you can have, your sentences can be parallel structure hell.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But then, wouldn't diagramming the sentence be a way to try to understand and fix the problem she's talking about? Or not?
Yeah.
Or breaking the sentence up into 2 or 3 sentences. That's the.
There are various ways. There are various ways there's, the first part of the problem is to recognize what the problem is. Once you recognize what the problem is, sometimes you have to get a little creative. Sometimes it means breaking it up, sometimes it means just rearranging elements. And sometimes it means just finding a sentence adverb that would, like obviously or evidently or, unfortunately or, whatever, so you can, there are various ways, there can be more than one solution to a bad sentence. This is another one that people screw up all the time. A lot of people don't understand the difference between restrictive and non-restrictive modifiers. So if I wanted to say, a restrictive adjectival phrase specifies which ones. So he threw away the potatoes that were rotten. Did he throw away all the potatoes? Only if they were rotten. So this sentence implies that he only threw away some of them, and the ones that he threw away were the rotten ones. Now, on the other hand, he said, if you say he threw away the potatoes which were rotten, right. Now, where you get into trouble is when people use which but no comma. I do not trust people who use which but no comma.
They say
I
that.
see it all the time.
So if it's restrictive, use that. If it's non-restrictive, use comma which. And I mentioned about sentence adverbs. A sentence adverb doesn't say it doesn't modify anything in a sentence, but it's not dangling. It's just expressing your opinion about what the sentence says. So if I say, do I give you examples? Okay. Yeah, sentence adverbs are a concise and somewhat sneaky way to editorialize. So if I say, it is unfortunate for me that, you can say unfortunately, such and such. So it's a way of expressing your opinion. Well, this is, from my point of view, for me, this is unfortunate. Or I am hopeful that, hopefully. Or it is obvious to me that, obviously. Yeah.
Hopefully, I was always taught never to begin a sentence with hopefully. It usually doesn't make any sense.
Well, that's because they don't understand that it's a sentence adverb. Those are the same people who complain that you shouldn't begin a sentence with hopefully. Curiously, they have no objection to curiously. Fortunately, they have no objection to fortunately. But it's a sentence adverb, and they don't, yeah.
Let me bring up never to use the word obviously.
It's obvious to you.
But we were taught this in our patents class. You can't legally use the word obviously in your medical writing.
Yeah.
Because it would destroy your patent. It could be used against you to.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's also an arrogance to it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
but you should never use the word obviously in your medical writing because under patent law, if it's obvious, if you ever put that in a technical document like in an NDA, obviously this drug works to cure cancer. Your patent will be invalidated. Never, ever use the word obviously.
Yeah, because then if it's so obvious, then you didn't invent anything.
Yeah, the lawyers will destroy it.
Yeah, but it's sentence that, it depends on what you're writing about. So, I mean, these words are ways of expressing your opinions. Let's see. Now, adverbial clauses can also be restrictive or non-restrictive. So he decided to get more sleep, as his doctor suggested. Notice that he decided to get more sleep is a complete thought. And this, as his doctor suggested, is an afterthought. It's not really restricting the action at all. So he decided to read a book while he was waiting for the train. That while he was waiting for the train is restricting that action to the time that he's waiting for the train. So here you've got a restrictive adverbial phrase. You may need a comma with a restrictive clause if there's more than one verb, just to clarify which. So if she, because you've got decided to try, because you've got two verbs here. So if you put that comma there, it makes it clear that the because is he decided because of that. That's actually not a good example. I should get a better one.
Yeah. If we reverse that around, that last one, and started the sentence with because, which I was taught you never do, but which is legitimate to do.
Well, I don't
Let's change
understand
that
where they
part.
got this idea that you can't begin a sentence with subordinated conjunction.
So now
Where did they get that idea?
I don't know, but that was years ago, they taught us, don't start it, but I know it's legitimate now, but let's say, turn it around, and because he had nothing to lose, comma, he decided to try what.
No, then it's clear.
Yeah.
But so you put the comma even if you reversed it?
If you begin the sentence with a subordinate clause, or a subordinate, with an element like that, either an adjectival phrase or an adverbial phrase or a subordinate clause, you would put a comma after it. I just would.
And that's why I don't understand that, because I think when you reverse it, you don't need the comma. That's,
Yeah, that's the way
I'm feeling.
If you reverse this, you would need the comma.
Yeah, not reverse it, the way you have it there, I don't see why you would need the comma.
This is actually a bad example, I should come up with a better one. He decided to, there was the one I put in my book was, he decided not to run because he was afraid. Now, did he decide not to run because he was afraid, or, did he decide or run? Or he decided to run because he was afraid?
Yeah.
Okay, he decided to run because he was afraid. Or, wait a minute, that's not, I can't remember the.
So you could.
I have one example, and not trivial, I just can't remember off the top
He
of my
could
head.
either be running because he was afraid and decided not to run because he was afraid,
Right,
or he could be deciding because he was afraid.
right.
Yeah.
So it's to make it clear whether the decision or the running was because you, yeah.
In the one, the restrictive phrase,
Mm-hmm.
it says he decided to read a book while he was waiting for the train. And when I would read that sentence, I would say, well, did he decide while he was waiting for the train to read a book? Or he decided that when he was waiting for a train, he would read a book?
That's an excellent point, because you've got more than one decided to read. You've got a finite verb here, and you've got this infinitive acting as a complement to that verb. So you've got two verb elements there.
So the sentence the way it is right now is confusing, correct?
Yeah.
That's the
No.
point.
I would, to make it clear that if the decision while he was well,
No,
It's a confusing
it's
sentence.
Yeah.
When did he decide?
No, I mean, you could either write, he decided while he was waiting for the train to read a book.
That's
when he
made the decision to
Well,
Yeah,
you
that-
know,
meaning that's when he
right.
made the decision. Or he decided to read a book while he was waiting for the train, which
So it's
means this is what he was going to do while he was
Well,
waiting for the train.
did he decide like last night,
Right.
that tomorrow when he's going to be on the train, he's going to read
Exactly.
the book?
Did he make it over coffee, morning coffee?
if I wanted to clarify that if the decision was while he was waiting,
Yes.
I would say he decided, while he was waiting for the train, to read a book.
Or you could say while he was waiting for the train,
Comma.
he decided to read a book.
Comma.
You could say
Yes,
that,
yes, you
correct?
could do either way, either put it at the beginning of the sentence or put it directly after the verb. Either way would clarify it.
So leaving it there,
It's
you
confusing.
shouldn't leave it there.
You shouldn't leave it that
I mean, if you
way.
wanna say that he decided to, he was reading the book while he was waiting for the train, how do you say that? Just say, just cut out decided.
While he was waiting for the train, he decided to read a book.
But what,
No, if you just wanna say he was, I guess you just don't need to decided it,
Right.
he wants to say,
yeah, that's another, you can eliminate the ambiguity you can solve the problem of, this is actually what they call a squinting adverb. Well, normally a squinting adverb is an adverb that's between two verbs, so you can't tell which way it's looking. So they literally call it a squinting adverb. So when you have more than one verb in a sentence, watch out for the adverbs, because it's not always clear what they're actually modifying or what they should be modifying. And sometimes if you're editing, you may have to ask a lot of queries to sort that out. Let's see, what else is there? Oh yeah, simple rules for punctuation. Noun, verb. You got two independent clauses here. Each could stand as a sentence. They're being joined by a coordinating conjunction. So you use comma and. No coordinating conjunction, semicolon. If you've got a comma within the independent clauses, then you use a semicolon.
But in the first example, it's perfectly clear if you don't have a comma there. And commas usually are when you need clarification or a clause. So there's no ambiguity in the first.
When the companies where I've worked for have always used close punctuation, which means they use all of the grammatical, or all of the punctuation that the structure of the sentence calls for. And that actually is a good practice, because you run into problems with what they call garden path sentences. And I don't remember if that article is run yet, but I wrote an article about that for the Animal Journal, and there's a chapter about it in my book.
What's the term you used?
A garden path sentence. A garden path,
Garden path.
a garden path sentence is a sentence that is, by definition, a garden path sentence is grammatically correct and it's unambiguous. Okay, there's no grammatical problem per se in it. And once you're done reading it, it's clear what it means. But it initially lures you into a false interpretation. So, the horse raced past the barn and fell. By the time you get to fell, you realized that it was the horse that was raced past the barn, fell. So sometimes that particular garden path effect resulted from the use of a reduced relative clause. I mean, that was dropped from the sentence. As a result, that's where the ambiguity, the initial apparent ambiguity came from. But you can also end up with a garden path effect by dropping punctuation marks. Now, by the time that people get to the end of the sentence, they'll have figured out what you meant, probably. But they'll be annoyed because they had to backtrack and reread the sentence and say, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense, and then they have to go back. So it's even though the sentence is not technically ungrammatical, it's still annoying. Okay, so that's again, I could go on further, but they probably want us to
I think about my.
wrap things up. So if anybody has any sort of questions, I mean.
Lori, can you share your slides, like,
Oh,
can I
absolutely.
email it to everyone?
Yeah, if anybody wants just email me and I'll send you my slides. I'm gonna be out of town for a few days, so it's, and I have to give these away because I'm gonna have new ones that are based on my book covers. Perfect. Thanks. Good to see you.
Well,
Well, cheaper one.
Emma in New York will probably be able to email everyone a copy of the slides, since there's some that are not in here.
Yeah, and I can give you the whole bigger thing, because it was heavy enough carrying all this.
And the name of your book again, Laurie,
It's
is?
not trivial.
Which can be purchased eventually?
Yes, can be, I guess next month, I suppose, it depends on, well, you already have one.
I know where.
You know where I live. So anyway, well that's, and I want to just show you another.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, you've been a great audience.
Oh, yeah.
And now you can do the grammar chance.
Thank you so much, Laurie. Should I turn this off?
One last question. Did you choose that picture because it looks so much like you?
Like what?
I said, did you choose the cover picture because it looks so much like you?
No. Does she?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know I was such a fox.
Get yourself some of the jewelry. There you go.
Yeah.
Could be you.